All right, tonight we go back in time, way back to an age of torchlight creaky cartwheels and ideas so strange they make your nightmares feel like comfort food. You wake up in a straw-stuffed mattress, your mouth aching like you've chewed gravel in your sleep. No dentists in sight, just a barber surgeon with bloodied aprons and sharp hooks. As you stumble to the wash basin, a wooden bowl with yesterday's rain, the town bell rings. But today's not market day. No, today, someone's being punished for dancing too much. This is the Middle Ages, and everything is creepy as sin. Oh, and you probably won't survive this. Subscribe before you fall asleep, because if you don't, a medieval barber might appear at your door with a jar of leeches and a tooth plier made from actual pliers. Also, post your location and local time in the comments. We're mapping out a world of insomniacs, one sleepless history buff at a time. Now go ahead and kill the overhead light, maybe throw a blanket over your shoulders, or crack the window just a bit to let in that perfectly spooky breeze. It's story time. And tonight you're living the nightmarishly normal life of the medieval world. You trudge down a narrow alleyway, stepping over some mysterious animal dung, don't ask, and clutch your face. Toothache, deep, pulsing. You'd give anything for a dentist, except it's the 1300s. The person you're about to visit isn't called a dentist. He's just the local tooth puller, and his qualifications include owning strong arms and having a cloth to muffle screams. But before he grabs his rusty tongs, he squints into your mouth and announces that your pain is caused by worms. Yes, tiny tooth worms. Medieval people actually believed your teeth were hollow and that worms crawled inside them, gnawing and wriggling around. If this sounds made up, imagine your tooth being smoked over herbs to drive the worm out. Historians still argue whether this theory came from Babylonian sources or if it just hatched like one of those mythical worms itself. So he wraps a cloth around your head, wedges his knees against your chest, and yanks. No anesthetic, of course, just the soothing sound of church bells and your own muffled shriek. Maybe he'll throw in a bit of bloodletting to balance your humors. Because in the medieval mind, everything wrong with you, pain, sadness, too much sneezing, was due to your 4 bodily humors being out of whack. And how do you fix it? Simple. You let blood out, often while lying on a special wooden bloodletting bed with carved grooves for drainage. It's oddly cozy if you're into that kind of thing. By the way, barbers doubled as surgeons, dentists, and minor amputators. That red and white barber pole you see today, it comes from the bloody cloths they used after cutting people open. Cute, right? Let's say you're still alive. You stagger home, probably clutching a little pouch of rosemary or garlic to ward off future tooth spirits. But you're still not safe, because next door, someone's got a headache and the town healer is preparing a treatment of crushed beetles mixed with vinegar, and maybe if you're lucky, some powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, but no one knows that yet. And because superstition is the dominant prescription pad, you also have folks who chew on frog guts for sore throats, and women wearing weasel bones around their necks for fertility. Historians debate whether most people truly believe this stuff or just went along with it, like putting healing crystals under your pillow, because why not? Meanwhile, cleanliness is a big old mystery. You might go weeks without a proper bath. Not because water is scarce, but because some scholars and physicians warn that hot baths make your pores too open, inviting all sorts of nasty spirits and diseases to jump inside. The solution: stay dirty. Stink equals safety. Of course, there's the classic leech treatment. Picture a noblewoman reclining on a cushioned chair while a monk calmly places fat squiggling leeches onto her pale arms. Not to kill anything, just to restore balance. One source claims royal physicians believed certain leeches worked better on Tuesdays. Historians still argue whether that was about astrology or just a really bored monk doing his best. And the worst part? Some people collected these leeches in clay pots, keeping them in their homes, as pets or roommates, or both. Anyway, now that your tooth is gone, your humors are drained, and your body smells like medieval courage. You lie back in bed and stare up at the timbered ceiling. You're wondering, was any of this normal? Absolutely. In the Middle Ages, it was practically luxury. You wake up the next morning with a little less blood in your body, a slightly lighter head, and a newfound fear of dentistry. But your problems aren't over yet. You're feeling feverish dizzy, and let's be honest, kind of violated by the whole toothworm ordeal. So what do? You stumble your way to the town physician. Not that he has a degree, or training, or a reliable method, but he does have one special skill that medieval Europe swears by. He can read your pee like tea leaves. That's right. You hand over a flask of your warmest, freshest morning urine, and the man goes to work. He holds it up to the light, swirls, it maybe sniffs it. And if you're truly blessed, he tastes it. No joke. Tasting urine was considered a legitimate diagnostic method. Sweetness diabetes, cloudiness infection, red tinge. You may wish to prepare your soul. This isn't a joke. Physicians kept special charts showing how different colors of urine matched different diseases. These were called urine wheels, and they were treated like sacred tools of healing. And while it's easy to giggle, historians still argue whether this was more effective than bloodletting. Honestly, hard to say. As you sit awkwardly in his thatched roof clinic, watching a man swish your pee like a sommelier, he mutters something about yellow bile in imbalance. This means a laxative, a medieval laxative, which could be anything from dried figs to powdered stones soaked in wine. In your case, it's mashed leeks with goose grease, taken 3 times daily until something releases. You don't ask what. You know. But here's where things get creepier. The physician then offers you a charm, a small piece of parchment with symbols drawn in ochre ink. He folds it carefully and tells you to wear it under your tunic, close to your skin. You nod. Of course. Everyone knows that diseases can be scared off with the right blend of holy symbols and obscure Latin. You clutch it tightly. You want it to work. You need it to work. On your way home, you pass a woman carrying her husband's urine to the same doctor. She's wearing a heavy cloak, even though it's warm, and she moves like she's hiding something. You glance down. Her shoes are mismatched, an old sign of bad luck. You say nothing. She says nothing. That's the deal here. And just as you turn down the alley, a child shouts that the urine prophet has cured their uncle's madness. Apparently, the treatment was a paste of mint and rabbit brain mixed into porridge and whispered over by a priest. You laugh nervously. Then you cough. Hard. The kind of cough that echoes through your chest like a falling stone. Oh no, not the lungs. Now, in the 1300s, chest infections are terrifying. And the usual treatment, bloodletting again, plus mustard plasters, maybe a mixture of honey and old wine, drizzled down your throat by someone who smells like dried herbs and stale cheese. If that doesn't work, they'll prescribe bed rest next to a pot of burning rosemary. Of course, if things get really bad, your family might resort to a healing ceremony involving relics. A toe bone from St. Ethelburga, a cracked vial of water taken from a martyr's shrine. Or if you're desperate, the skull of a saint, polished and turned into a cup. You drink from it. You hope, you wait. The line between medicine and magic here, very, very blurry. In fact, many medical books of the time included spells and astrological charts. One text recommends healing fevers by chanting to the moon while facing north with your feet in a cold stream. Another suggests that sleeping with a black chicken under your bed will protect your soul. Historians still argue whether people actually believed in these methods or just did them in case. But if the healing doesn't work, there's always confession. Better to die with a clean soul than a dirty one after all. Your priest will stop by, mumble prayers, and maybe sprinkle a bit of salt near your bed to ward off demons. You lie down, you try to breathe. The charm on your chest is damp with sweat. The candle flickers. You pray the physician was right. And somewhere back in his crooked cottage, the urine prophet examines the next brass pot, muttering to himself as he tilts it toward the window, searching for that perfect golden gleam. You recover. Or maybe you don't. Honestly, in medieval times, most people just kind of kept going. Whether they were healed cursed or halfway to the afterlife, you pressed on. Because stopping that wasn't normal. Speaking of normal today, you're walking down the village lane when you hear it, the distant rhythmic jingle of bells. But it's not a festival. It's not a merchant. It's a leper. You freeze. Everyone does. Because when those bells ring, it means someone is approaching who isn't allowed to get too close. Someone who's been marked by disease and by law as unclean. The bells aren't decorative. They're a warning. They're the sound of fear. Lepers in the Middle Ages weren't just sick. They were outcasts. Once diagnosed, they were forced to wear distinctive clothing, often long grey or brown cloaks, with patches sewn on, sometimes with a hood, sometimes with a wooden clapper, to alert others to their presence. And yes, a bell. Always the bell. You step back instinctively, even though you don't see anything wrong with them at a glance. But that's the trouble. Leprosy was a catch-all term for a bunch of different skin conditions. Some were highly contagious. Some were just misunderstood. Historians still argue whether medieval leprosy was the same as modern Hansen's disease. The records are vague. The fear, not so much. The person passes eyes low, their bell swaying gently. No one speaks. It's an unspoken pact of survival and superstition. You suddenly feel the urge to wash your hands. But there's no soap. And remember, bathing is still questionable. Now imagine you're one of the unfortunate souls diagnosed with leprosy. Your fate, banishment to a leper colony outside the village walls. These weren't necessarily prisons, but they weren't pleasant either. Isolated, patrolled, sometimes managed by monks who took pity, sometimes not. You'd be given a funeral mass while still alive, symbolically declared dead to the world. Your name struck from records. Your land, if you had any past, to your heirs. If that sounds harsh, well, welcome to the medieval healthcare system. Still, not everything was grim. Some leper houses were surprisingly humane. They offered food, shelter, even community. In some rare cases, lepers who healed or who never had leprosy to begin with were allowed back into society after proving they were clean, often by soaking in cold rivers or doing public penance, or both. But here's the twist. Some people chose to join leper communities voluntarily. Why free food, guaranteed shelter, no taxes? In a feudal world full of suffering, it was a strange kind of stability. One chronicler even accused people of faking symptoms to gain access to charity hospitals. Historians still debate how common this was. But let's be real. If the only alternative is starvation, You'd probably consider a few creative skin blemishes too. Back in the village, gossip swirls. Someone says the leper was once a wealthy merchant. Someone else claims they saw her kiss a goat. None of it makes sense, but it doesn't have to. Fear writes its own rules. Later that day, you visit the church. A wooden sign near the door reads "No lepers beyond this point." You cross yourself. You wonder what happens if someone ignores the rule. Then you see the priest offering confession to a veiled figure kneeling behind a low curtain. Just beyond it, a leper's bell rests quietly on the floor. Even in fear, people find loopholes. On your way out, you pass the town well. A group of children are tossing pebbles at a rat. They laugh, but then one of them hesitates. He heard that rats can carry leper breath. Is that a thing no one knows? But the rat is dead now, and that seems like enough safety for the day. The bells jingle one last time before dusk. You hurry home. You draw your shutters. You light a candle. And as you settle into bed, you think tomorrow it could be you. It starts with a scream. Not just any scream, the kind that ricochets down wooden halls and sends everyone rushing, breath-held hands clasped. You duck beneath the low archway of the manor house, drawn toward the sound that no one talks about, but everyone knows. Someone is giving birth. And in the Middle Ages, childbirth isn't a miracle, it's a battlefield. You're led into a cramped, candlelit chamber, heavy with the scent of sweat herbs and fear. The mother-to-be is soaked in linens and prayers. She's surrounded by midwives, not trained doctors, but women who learned by doing, often for years, sometimes with as much knowledge as any man of medicine. One grips her hand. Another mashes dried rose petals and honey into a paste to smear across her belly. A third holds a relic of Saint Margaret above the woman's head. Saint Margaret is the patron saint of childbirth. Her story involves being swallowed by a dragon and cutting her way out with a cross. You're not sure how that helps, but in this room, any divine assistance is welcome. Because here's the reality. Giving birth is one of the most dangerous things a woman can do. No sterile instruments, no painkillers, no emergency C-section if things go south. If the baby's stuck, the midwife may reach inside with her bare hands. Or she might call for the village surgeon to use special tools, curved hooks and knives to remove the child, often to save the mother, not the infant. You stand frozen in the corner as the woman screams again, thrashing. Her husband waits outside, pacing furiously. Men aren't allowed in the birthing room. This is a woman's domain, sacred and terrifying. Suddenly, the midwife calls for the birthing stool, a sturdy wooden chair with a hole in the center. The woman is hoisted onto its legs, trembling. The stool is ancient, carved with symbols passed down generations. It's supposed to help, but nothing about this looks easy. And here comes the part where things get medieval. Literally. The midwife places a piece of iron under the bed, believed to ward off witches. A candle made from blessed wax is lit beside the door. In some villages, women even wear necklaces made of wolf teeth for strength or whisper charms into the laboring woman's ear. Historians still argue how much of this was superstition versus community ritual, but either way, it's intense. The child is born. After hours of blood and breath and saltwater tears, the cry fills the room like a storm breaking. The baby is blue, then pink, then wailing. Relief spreads, but no one relaxes, because danger isn't over. The mother is bleeding, a lot. You watch the midwives go to work. One presses herbs to her abdomen, another chants quietly. They bind her tightly with cloth, administer warm ale laced with sage and pray. This is the moment that decides whether celebration or mourning follows. Miraculously, the mother stabilizes. But others aren't so lucky. Medieval records show mortality rates for childbirth were staggeringly high. Some estimates suggest 1 in 3 women died due to complications over their lifetime. And that's just the ones recorded. Later that night, the baby is baptized. Quickly. Not at a church, but right there in the home. Because if the child dies unbaptized, their soul is believed to linger in limbo. A priest murmurs Latin. Water from a clay bowl trickles down the infant's brow. Everyone exhales. You walk home under the pale moon, the echo of screams still lodged in your bones. You pass the town's birthing cross, a small wooden post where offerings are sometimes left. Dried flowers, bits of lace, pieces of ribbon tied by women hoping for protection. You suddenly understand why they pray so hard, why they lean on saints and relics and old charms, because in this world, life doesn't begin gently, it claws its way in. And death is always watching from the corner of the room. The sun is bright today, the air strangely festive, and the smell of roast meat wafts through the town square. You think market day a celebration, a noble's birthday. Not quite. It's execution day. You make your way past the bakery and hear laughter, real full-bellied laughter from a crowd already forming around the wooden platform at the center of town. You spot families setting out woven blankets like it's a picnic. Kids scamper with sticks of candied fruit. One woman offers cider. Another knits calmly, as if the entertainment ahead is a church sermon. And in a way, it kind of is. In medieval times, executions were public events. And not only that they were expected events, they weren't hushed or hidden. They were planned, anticipated, and attended with gusto. And you're about to see one. You find a spot near a barrel of pickled fish and squint at the stage. The condemned is already up there, shackled and hunched. Maybe a thief, maybe a murderer, maybe just someone who insulted the wrong noble. You don't ask. It almost doesn't matter. The sentence has already been decided, and the executioner, dressed in crimson, with a black hood, is sharpening his axe. The town crier reads out the charges, and the crowd cheers or boos accordingly. You sip from a wooden cup, chewing on the end of your cloak. It's all oddly surreal. But the creepy part, this is normal. Entire towns used these events to reinforce social order. Criminals weren't just punished, they were made examples. And the people they were expected to watch to participate in the communal act of justice. Some even believed that watching an execution could cleanse the soul. Historians still debate whether this was a religious notion or just good crowd psychology. Suddenly a drum roll, a hush. The executioner steps forward. Now here's a fact you're not prepared for. Executions didn't always go cleanly. That axe, it might take 2, 3, even 4 swings. And hangings, they didn't always snap the neck cleanly. Sometimes it was a slow suffocation. There were even times when botched jobs became entertainment in themselves. The crowd winces, cheers. Someone near you drops a meat pie and doesn't even notice. And then it's over. Sort of. Because after the execution, the body might be displayed, hung on a gibbet outside the city, its limbs splayed as a warning to others. Or the head might be placed on a pike above the gate. It depends on the crime. And the politics. There's a story going around about a man who stole a bishop's silver spoon and had his hand cut off in front of the entire town. He survived and later became a tavern keeper called One Hand Hal. His tavern sign, a painted spoon dripping blood. You're not sure if it's true, but it sounds about right. And remember, executions weren't just for murder or treason. You could be executed for counterfeiting blasphemy, even certain fashion violations if they insulted nobility. One young man allegedly wore a purple cloak reserved for royals and was beaten until unconscious in the square. His cloak burned in a separate ceremonial fire. But the weirdest part of all, sometimes the condemned spoke before their death, offering forgiveness, asking for mercy, or warning the crowd not to follow their path. These speeches were sometimes recorded by scribes and read aloud later in other towns. Public death as traveling theater. You walk away after the event, your bread untouched, your cider warm. A child runs by, giggling, waving a little flag with the town's crest. Someone's already sweeping the platform clean. Life goes on. Because in the medieval mind, justice isn't just served, it's staged, savored, and swallowed with lunch. You wake up the next morning to a heavy fog clinging to the cobblestones. Someone's knocking at your door. You peer through the warped glass and see a strange silhouette, long robe, broad hat-beaked mask. The infamous plague doctor. Now let's set something straight. That figure in front of you, he's not a trained physician. He's more like a medieval freelancer paid by towns to monitor the sick and tally the dead. The beak mask, not some quirky fashion statement. It's stuffed with herbs like lavender, cloves, and mint, meant to protect him from miasma or bad air, believed to carry disease. And somehow, he looks creepier in daylight. You invite him in, because refusing might earn you suspicion. He doesn't speak, just gestures to your neighbor's door. They haven't been seen in 3 days. You nod grimly. It's happening again. The Black Death may have peaked in the 1300s, but plagues continue in waves for centuries. And every time it returns, so do the panic, the fear, the rituals. You rub a clove across your neck, an old charm for protection. The air smells of burnt thyme and damp wool. The doctor inspects the street, makes notes in a leather-bound ledger, and then leaves a chalk mark on the neighbor's door, a crude X. Everyone knows what it means: quarantine. Whether anyone inside is still alive, no one's allowed to find out. And here's the thing. Despite their eerie appearance, plague doctors were often powerless. They carried long sticks to prod the sick, took pulse readings through gloves, and sometimes offered dubious advice, like walk in the sun or sit in smoke. Historians still argue whether any of it helped or if it was just for show. You go about your day trying not to breathe too deeply. You avoid wells. You avoid strangers. You avoid rats, especially rats. One man swears the plague is caused by comets. Another says it's divine punishment for moral corruption. A priest in the next village claims it came from a cursed relic, and now everyone avoids the old chapel entirely. The town sets up death carts. To collect the bodies, wooden wagons pulled by gaunt horses and driven by men who wear garlic around their necks. You see one pass by a bell clanging softly and wonder if it's just your imagination or if the bell sounds closer every day. Meanwhile, people try whatever they can to avoid infection. Burning barrels of sulfur, rubbing onions under their arms, drinking vinegar laced with rose petals. One woman walks around with a toad sewn into her bodice. She claims it draws out the sickness. No one questions her. They're too afraid. Plague houses often have their doors sealed with bricks. You walk past one, the plaster still wet. Someone left a bunch of herbs on the step, as a blessing or a goodbye. You hear rumors that in big cities, plague victims are buried in mass graves. One chronicle mentions a pit so wide it took 3 days to fill. The gravediggers drank constantly, not just from grief, but because ale was considered safer than water. Some towns even offered plague insurance to officials, money paid to families if they died in service. You consider whether that's comfort or just practical pessimism. And through it all, the plague doctor continues his rounds, his mask bobbing like a bird from some otherworldly realm. He's a symbol now of death, of fear, of futile hope. That night, you sleep with garlic strung above your bed and a dried lizard tucked in your pillow because an old woman said it would help. The candle flickers. Somewhere outside, the bell rings again, and you wonder if you survive. Will you ever forget the sound of that mask breathing in the fog? The village square is unusually loud today, but it's not a market day, and it's not an execution either. No, today's drama is taking place in the courthouse, a thatched roof building with wooden benches and mud brick walls. And at the center of it all stands a pig. A real pig, wearing a little rope harness, on trial. You slide into the back of the room just in time to hear the magistrate call for silence. Everyone's already giggling, except the pig. The pig looks deeply unimpressed. Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of animal trials, something so bizarre you'd think it was satire if it weren't written into actual medieval court records. The charge is homicide. The pig reportedly attacked a child. The villagers want justice. And the court. It's taking this very seriously. There's a scribe recording testimony, a judge in a velvet cap, and even a lawyer appointed to defend the accused animal. Yes, a pig gets legal representation. This wasn't a one-off event. Animal trials happened all across medieval Europe. Pigs, goats, horses, even roosters were brought before judges. Sometimes the charges were violent, biting a person, sometimes blasphemous, laying eggs on holy days, and sometimes just weird, a rooster accused of being possessed by Satan after crowing at night. Historians still argue what these trials meant. Were they symbolic, performative, a way to vent collective grief or shame? Or did people genuinely believe animals could be morally responsible? Back in the courtroom, the pig is grunting softly. Someone throws a cabbage. They're escorted out. The defense lawyer clears his throat and launches into an impassioned speech about natural behavior and the pig's lack of intent. The crowd tries not to laugh. The judge nods solemnly. But here's the chilling part. If the pig is found guilty, it will be executed. Sometimes by hanging, sometimes by public beheading. In France, one pig was dressed in human clothes before its punishment, just to make the whole thing even more unsettling. And it wasn't only domestic animals. Insects could be tried too. Picture this, a village overrun by weevils. The townspeople go to court not to request pest control, but to file a lawsuit against the weevils. The judge orders the insects to appear in court on a set date. Shockingly, they don't. Rude. So the judge excommunicates them from the church. Yes, bugs were sometimes literally cursed and banished in legal documents. In one case, a swarm of locusts was ordered to vacate a vineyard within 6 days or face divine judgment. Did it work? Hard to say. But the vineyard owner definitely felt better afterward. Today's pig guilty. The sentence death by hanging. The villagers cheer half-heartedly. The children are disappointed there's no fire involved. You watch the pig being led away and wonder if this whole thing was for the crowd or for the conscience. You pass the town blacksmith on your way home. He tells you, between hammer strikes, that he once saw a donkey tried for heresy. Wouldn't kneel during mass, he says. Definitely possessed. You laugh mostly because you don't want to believe it. But later that night, you hear whispers about a cat burned at the stake in another village for consorting with witches. Someone says a town once put a dog on trial for stealing a loaf of blessed bread. You pull your blanket tighter and glance at the family goat sleeping near the fire. Tomorrow, you think you might teach it to curtsy. Just in case, you rise with the dawn, aching from the cold that crept into your bones overnight. A basin of icy water waits on the windowsill, but you don't reach for it. Because here in your dusty little village, bathing is a rare and suspicious activity. Yes, you heard that right. Cleanliness is controversial. In medieval times, people had a complicated relationship with water. Public bathhouses were common in earlier centuries, borrowed from Roman traditions, but over time, suspicions grew. Doctors started warning that hot water opened the pores and allowed disease to slip inside like a thief in the night. And so the logic followed: if you stayed dirty, you stayed safe. You pull on your tunic, which hasn't been properly washed in weeks, and tie it off with a leather belt. Everyone smells a bit like damp wool and wood smoke, so no one comments. It's normal. Creepy, sure, but normal. When someone did decide to wash, it was often just hands, face, and maybe feet. Full immersion. Risky business. You've heard tales of bathers catching chills and dying days later. Some folks whisper that demons live in bathwater. Others say nakedness invites temptation. Either way, you grab a cloth soaked in vinegar and herbs and dab your underarms. That counts, right? And don't even think about soap, not in the modern sense. What you've got is a lump of rendered animal fat mixed with ashes. It works, sort of. It smells strong. You head to the well for water and spot your neighbor hauling buckets to her house. She's bathing her children in a wooden tub, one after another, in the same water. It's murky after the first child. By the fifth, you're not sure there's even water left in it. Just a broth of medieval childhood. This, by the way, is where the phrase "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" supposedly comes from. The water would get so filthy by the end that the smallest child might be invisible in the grime. Of course, not everyone avoided bathing. Some people loved it. Wealthy nobles had perfumed baths, sometimes with flower petals or heated stones. Monasteries often had rules requiring monks to bathe a few times a year, though some did more in secret. And cities like Paris and London had bathhouses, until they became associated with other, let's say, less hygienic activities. Brothels. Soon, bathhouses were shut down in waves. Moral panic took over. If you were clean, people wondered what you were hiding. Who are you trying to impress, they'd ask. What sin are you preparing? For historians still debate whether medieval folks really avoided cleanliness altogether, or if our records are skewed by church bias. But the fear was real. People genuinely believed too much bathing could make you weak, unmanly, even spiritually vulnerable. Instead, you cover smells with herbs. Tuck rosemary in your sleeves. Sow lavender into your pillows. You might even carry a pomander, a little ball of scented resin and spices. Royals carried fancier versions crusted in gold. Yours is wood with a sprig of mint jammed inside. At night, your bedding isn't washed so much as aired, which means it's hung over a fence for a few hours, then patted with a broom. Mites, fleas, and the occasional rat are common bedfellows. You sleep through the scratching now. Everyone does. And lice. They're just part of the ecosystem. You use a fine-toothed comb, sometimes heated with fire, and pray you don't catch fire yourself. One woman you know keeps a pet chicken near her bed to peck lice from her scalp. It's both helpful and horrifying. You think about bathing, a real one. You dream of warm water and clean clothes. But then you remember the stories, the priest's warning, the boy who bathed on the feast of St. Agatha and caught a fever, the whispers about water spirits. So instead, you blow out your candle, scratch your neck, and pull the covers close. Tomorrow, maybe you'll rub yourself with wine. That's a thing too. You're jolted awake by music faint at first, drifting from the village square like a breeze. But it's not cheerful, not the lute and ale kind of music. It's frantic, repeating, twisting itself into a hypnotic rhythm that you can't quite place. You throw on your cloak and follow the sound. And what you find is people dancing. Not just one or two, dozens, moving wildly without rest in the early morning light. Their feet slap the cobblestones, their arms flail. Some are laughing, some are crying. One woman's eyes are rolled back, her body spasming in something that looks more like seizure than joy. You've stumbled into one of the strangest medieval phenomena ever recorded, a dancing plague. Yes, this happened multiple times. The most famous case was in 1518 in Strasbourg. A woman began to dance in the street and couldn't stop. Days passed. Dozens joined her. Within weeks, hundreds were caught in the rhythm. Some danced themselves to death. Literally. Today, in your village, the people can't seem to stop. Musicians have been summoned not to soothe, but to accompany. The logic may be, if the dancers reach a natural end, the affliction will pass. You stare in horror as one man collapses from exhaustion and is dragged to the side. Another woman tears at her hair while continuing to stomp in erratic, frenzied steps. Children mimic her at the edges of the crowd, thinking it's a game. It's not. No one really knows what causes it. Historians still argue. Was it mass hysteria, a response to starvation or trauma? A fungus like ergot poisoning the same kind found in moldy rye bread, which can trigger hallucinations? Or was it, as some villagers say, divine punishment? You overhear a priest insisting the dancers are possessed, and the local healer muttering about bad humors in the feet. One old woman spits 3 times and crosses herself. You edge closer. You recognize a face, your cousin. His tunic is soaked through. He's been dancing for hours, lips cracked, skin blistered. You try to pull him away, but his limbs move without rhythm or sense. It's as if something else is moving him. Suddenly, the musicians stop. Silence descends for a heartbeat, and the dancers keep going. At nightfall, some are dragged into barns and tied down. Others collapse where they stand. No one dares go to sleep. What if it's contagious, a curse passed by sight or sound? You return home shaken. Your boots echo on the wooden floor. You imagine your own feet twitching involuntarily. You wrap them in cloth as if that might anchor them. And you remember, this isn't the first time. Tales from neighboring towns tell of entire parishes infected. One chronicler wrote of people dancing on bridges until they collapsed into rivers. Another claimed a group danced into a church and burst into flame. Probably exaggerated. Probably. Still, you lie awake, staring at the ceiling, your toes twitching. Just a little. You hum a tune to distract yourself. But it's the same rhythm. The same. Always the same. You barely sleep. Every creak of the floorboards feels like the start of another dancing fit. So when the sky finally lightens into dawn gray, you sit up and try to shake the unease. But something else shakes you first. A loud cry from the street below. Wake up, 5 of the clock, and all is well. You jump, heart racing, before you remember it's just the night watch. In medieval towns, people didn't have alarm clocks, and roosters, though persistent, weren't always reliable. So cities employed human beings to walk the streets and shout out the time, and occasionally report if your house was on fire, or if thieves were about, or if the moon was acting funny. All legitimate concerns. You pull on your cloak and peer out the window. There he is, lantern swinging from a hook bell in hand, shouting again. 5 3/4. Skies clear. Keep thy fires low. He stomps past with purpose, and you wonder whether he sleeps during the day or just never sleeps at all. The night watch wasn't just an alarm system. It was part patrol, part news service, part roaming folklore. They'd call out the weather, announce births or deaths, and sometimes deliver personal messages if you slipped them a coin. And they weren't alone in the medieval symphony of noisy neighbors. In some towns, there were even designated knocker-uppers, people whose job was to tap on windows or doors at a specific time to wake up merchants, bakers, or travelers. Some used long poles, others threw dried peas. You once saw a woman rapping rhythmically on shutters with a wooden spoon, as if drumming sleep right out of the building. Of course, these human clocks weren't always accurate. One tired watchman might announce dawn an hour early. Another might skip half the bells altogether. Historians still debate whether their timing mattered, or if people just liked hearing a voice at night to feel a little less alone. You head down to the bakery later and hear the local butcher grumble, "He yelled 4 twice last night." Someone else chimes in, "Mine knocked at the wrong door, woke up my goats." General agreement, helpful in theory, chaotic in practice. But there's more to it. These late-night calls helped deter crime. If someone was sneaking about, the watchman might call out directly to them, "I see you, lad, with the sack." Sometimes that was enough to make them bolt. Other times, it turned into a foot chase, which, given the uneven cobblestones and uncooperative livestock, rarely ended gracefully. Some wealthier towns had watchmen with horns or wooden clappers to amplify their presence. Others issued watch tokens to prove they'd done their rounds. One old tale says, a night watchman once rang a church bell during a storm, believing it would scare away demons hiding in the clouds. You believe it? People will try anything at 3 a.m. That night, you try to fall asleep early, but your neighbor is practicing his watch calls for an upcoming town council audition. Yes, some towns auditioned for these roles. A good voice was prized. You hear him through the wall. 2 of the clock. All thieves are asleep. He'll need to work on his delivery. Eventually, you drift off, only to jolt awake again at another distant bellow. You groan, pull your cloak over your head, and try to embrace the odd comfort of being yelled at in the middle of the night. Because in medieval times, nothing says safety like a man screaming the hour while holding a lantern and looking deeply, profoundly tired. Morning again. Your throat is scratchy, your skin's a little too warm, and there's a suspicious rash climbing your arm. Naturally, you head straight to the village healer, because the doctor, remember, is still too busy sniffing urine and waving herbs over chickens. The healer's hut smells like damp moss and burnt fennel. Inside jars line every shelf. Some are filled with powders, some with pickled things, some you don't want to ask. She welcomes you with a toothless grin and begins poking at your spots. Then she gives you the bad news. It's the wind sickness, she says, nodding solemnly. You'll need a poultice. You nod along. That sounds reasonable, until she starts mixing crushed mice into a wooden bowl. Yes, mice. She's making mouse paste. You try not to panic as she adds wine rose water and a pinch of something that looks suspiciously like dirt. Then she slathers it on your rash. It's cold, it's lumpy, and it smells like guilt. Welcome to the wonderful world of medieval medicine, where normal cures often involved ingredients straight out of a nightmare. Take crocodile dung, for example. In some texts, it's suggested as a sunscreen, birth control, or even a cosmetic. You imagine someone calmly smearing that across their face before heading to church. The worst part, they thought it worked. Or perhaps you'd prefer snail slime, applied to boils, or used in healing drafts when mixed with cow's milk and honey. Someone once told you snail milk strengthens the spine. You're not convinced, but hey, medieval problems require medieval solutions. And then there are animal hearts. For certain fevers, a roasted sparrow heart tied around the neck was recommended. Not eaten warm. Bonus points if you caught the bird yourself at dawn. Historians still argue how widely these fringe cures were used versus written down by overly creative scribes. But there's enough consistency in the records to make you wonder if mouse mash really was someone's go-to prescription. You shift uncomfortably as the healer wraps your arm with a strip of old linen. Then she hands you a drink. Its dark purple, smells like feet, and she calls it boar root cordial. You ask what's in it. She chuckles and says, "Best you don't know." You drink it anyway, because in this world, trust is more potent than science. Still, not everything is bizarre. Some medieval remedies were actually effective. Honey was used to treat wounds. Willow bark helped with pain thanks to the salicylic acid, the same stuff in modern aspirin. And garlic, surprisingly antimicrobial. But then you remember the treatment for baldness that involved frying goat fat with ashes and rubbing it into your scalp while chanting a hymn to St. Jude. Somehow, the garlic seems much more grounded. There's also a practice called urine therapy, not just analyzing it, but using it. People washed wounds in urine, brushed their teeth with it, even drank it for inner clarity. A few brave souls used it as a face rinse, a bold skincare choice. And don't forget astrology. Your treatment might change depending on the position of Mars. If the stars say it's a bad day to bleed, the doctor won't do it. Instead, you might be offered a powder of sympathy meant to heal wounds remotely by treating the weapon that caused the injury, not the wound itself. Let that sink in. You get stabbed, they treat the dagger. You thank the healer hand over a few coins, and a button barter is big here and promise to rest. She gives you a second jar just in case. You don't open it. The label says Badger Balm. That night you lie under your blankets, the smell of rodent paste rising like incense. Your skin itches. You wonder if, maybe, just maybe, crocodile dung wouldn't have been worse. And then you smile because someone somewhere is rubbing goat urine into their temples right now and calling it progress. You're feeling better today. Relatively speaking, only one pustule instead of 3, and no mystery powders for breakfast. So, you decide to treat yourself. You reach for your nicest tunic, one dyed in a rich, deep saffron yellow. It's been folded carefully in your chest for weeks. But as soon as you step outside wearing it, you hear it. Gasps, whispers. One man drops his bread. You've just committed a fashion crime. Welcome to the world of sumptuary laws, medieval rules that dictated what you could wear based on your social class. Not just guidelines, not just suggestions, actual laws. If you were a merchant and wore fabric too fine or colors too royal, you could be fined, whipped, or worse, publicly shamed. And saffron, that color's reserved for nobility in some regions. Even worse, if your belt has silver buckles or your cloak bears patterned embroidery. Someone might think you're pretending to be a lord, and in the Middle Ages, pretending to be richer than you are was practically heresy. You hurry back inside, strip the tunic off, and replace it with your standard drab brown wool. Scratchy, safe. You sigh. Sumptuary laws weren't just about fashion, they were about control. They reminded everyone where they stood in the social pecking order. Tailors had to memorize entire lists of who could wear what velvet for clergy silk for barons, fur for dukes. Even buttons were sometimes regulated. Pearls, forget it. Unless you were royalty, even owning them was illegal. Historians still argue whether these laws were widely enforced or just barked about in sermons and scrolls. But one thing's certain, they were everywhere. Take the case of a butcher's wife in Florence who was fined for wearing a silk veil on a feast day, or the poor apprentice who got thrown in stocks for lacing his shoes with gold thread. Fashion wasn't just vanity, it was rebellion. And here's the creepy part, these laws weren't only enforced by the authorities. Your neighbors would turn you in. Jealousy ran deep. If someone suspected you were dressing above your station, they could report you anonymously to the town reeve. Sometimes entire villages were watched on festival days just to see if anyone broke out the forbidden teal or dared to don a feathered cap. Speaking of caps, there were rules about hat heights too. Too tall, and it was considered arrogant. Too wide, and it blocked processional views. You once heard of a man being taxed extra because his hat made people angry at church. There were even color crimes, literal restrictions based on hue. Purple, for example, was wildly expensive and reserved almost exclusively for the nobility or royalty. Dyes came from rare sources, like sea snails, and their cost alone made them inaccessible. But if someone managed to get their hands on a bit of it, maybe a scrap from a noble's cast-off wearing it in public, was dangerous. Still, people found loopholes. They layered cheaper fabrics underneath flashier ones to hide them. They wore illegal colors inside out. One clever tailor sewed red thread into the hem of a peasant's cloak, just enough to flash as he walked. You glance again at your forbidden tunic. It glows in the morning sun, regal and radiant. You quietly fold it away again. To cheer yourself up, you head to the village square. A traveling cloth merchant is selling bolts of legal fabric, mostly grey-brown and greyish-brown. One woman is examining a pale green shawl with terror, whispering, "Is this allowed?" The merchant leans in and says, "It's basil, not emerald. Emeralds for bishops." She nods like she's just learned a spell. Fashion in this world is a battlefield, a code, a whispered rebellion. You head home, wrap yourself in your brown cloak, and light a candle. The wick smells faintly of lavender and law-abiding dullness. But in your chest, folded tight, that saffron tunic waits. Someday you think, someday I'll wear it anyway. The knock at your door is quiet, almost polite. You're halfway through a bowl of barley stew when the sheriff appears, flanked by two men in hooded cloaks. One carries a bloodied dagger, the other carries a body. You don't need to ask what this is. It's a corpse trial. In medieval justice, dead bodies didn't just rest in peace, they testified. You follow the procession to the church courtyard, where a small crowd has already gathered. On a wooden table lies the deceased, a young man, pale and still. Beside him, bound and sweating, stands the accused. And you, along with everyone else, wait for the body to speak. Not literally, of course. That would be ridiculous. Instead, you're here for something far creepier. Cruentation, the belief that a corpse would bleed in the presence of its murderer. If the wounds begin to weep, if fresh blood trickles from the lips or cuts reopen, that's seen as divine confirmation of guilt. The priest leads a prayer, The accused stares down at his shackled hands. The crowd leans forward as the suspect is brought near the corpse. Everyone holds their breath. And then, a single red bead appears on the body's chest. Gasps, murmurs. The man swears it's not his doing, that it's coincidence, that the wound wasn't clean. But the crowd has seen enough. One old woman faints. A child starts crying. The judge calls for silence and bangs his staff on the stones. This was a real practice, common across medieval Europe, especially in Germanic and Slavic regions. Corpses were exhumed for trials, carried to courts, sometimes even propped upright in chairs so they could witness the proceedings. Historians still argue whether these events were religious ritual legal theater or genuine belief in divine justice. The line, as always, is blurry. You watch the accused be dragged away. His sentence will be decided tomorrow, possibly death, possibly public penance. Either way, the body has spoken. And then something stranger happens. A second man steps forward. He's gaunt, pale, trembling. He claims the spirit of the victim came to him in a dream, revealing the true killer. The judge allows it. Dream testimony is admissible. In fact, it's encouraged. He describes a dark figure, a betrayal, the sound of water dripping. The victim spoke in rhyme, apparently a bad omen. The crowd shifts uncomfortably. And just like that, the case reopens. Welcome to medieval forensic science. You head home later, mind spinning. You've heard stories like this before, of corpses refusing burial until justice was done, of saints' bodies glowing to identify liars, of skeletons rattling in tombs when murderers passed by. One tale involves a monk who denied a crime only to have a long-dead brother's bones collapse the moment he entered the chapel. Another village once claimed a beheaded man walked 3 steps after death, pointing toward his killer before collapsing. Whether any of it happened, who knows? But everyone remembers. Everyone repeats it. The next morning, you pass by the church again. The body has been buried. The accused vanished, either fled or sentenced. The dream witness now considered a prophet. He's handing out bits of linen with protective charms scrawled on them. You buy one, just in case you're ever accused, or worse, ever the one who bleeds. A storm's rolling in. You hear it before you see it, low, distant grumbling, like the sky itself is pacing. The clouds gather fast, thick and angry, and within minutes, the whole village feels tense, uneasy. You hurry toward the chapel because this kind of weather, it's not just bad luck, it's a sign. Of what exactly? That depends who you ask. The bell rings. Not for mass, not for death. This is the storm bell rung to frighten off demons. Yes, really, in the medieval worldview, thunder and lightning weren't just weather, they were a supernatural attack. Demons in the clouds, angels in battle, God sending a message. Or maybe the witches again. Storms were the stage for celestial conflict, and ringing bells was a way to disrupt the chaos. You duck inside the chapel, where the priest is already tugging on the rope with determination. The bell overhead groans, then tolls, echoing through the rafters and into the blackening sky. Let no evil take root in this parish, he yells. The townspeople murmur their amens. This wasn't just a quirk of your village. Across Europe, churches rang bells during storms, believing the sound could break up storm clouds. Some towers were even designed to resonate at frequencies that would supposedly drive back spirits. Ironically, many of these bells were struck by lightning because they were the tallest metal structures around. More than a few priests were killed mid-ringing. One record mentions a priest who was blasted right out of the tower mid-sermon. Another was found days later, his hands still fused to the rope. Historians still argue whether the practice persisted out of faith or habit. Probably both. Outside, lightning forks across the sky. You flinch. Someone throws salt across the threshold. A woman pulls out a pouch of dried fennel and starts to chant. Another man whispers about thunderstones, strange spiral-shaped rocks believed to fall from the sky during storms. They're actually fossilized sea creatures, but no one knows that yet. People keep them in their homes to ward off lightning and sickness. You spot one hanging over a neighbor's doorway, wrapped in red thread. Another family lights a fire and tosses rosemary and hair into it. Why to confuse goblins, obviously. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning cracks a tree outside the village wall. A few people scream. One boy runs. The priest rings the bell faster. You join the chorus, not out of faith exactly, but because fear is contagious. And besides, there's something oddly comforting about the rhythm, as if sound itself might hold the sky together. The storm breaks with a downpour that hammers the roof and soaks the chapel floor. People press closer. Someone starts singing a hymn. You hum along off-key and a little breathless. By nightfall, the storm has passed. The air smells like scorched earth and wet stone. The priest ties off the bell rope exhausted. Outside, puddles reflect a peaceful sky. The danger's gone. But the tension lingers. You walk home through the mud, past bundles of ash left at doorways, herbs nailed above windows, and rows of damp shoes lined along every stoop. Some call it superstition. Others call it safety. Either way, no one sleeps well when thunder's been overhead, and everyone listens just in case the bell rings again. Dawn again. Your shoes are still wet from last night's storm, and you feel like the sky left something behind, some heavy, invisible presence clinging to the village. You shake it off, determined to go about your day, but as you pass the old abbey, you see a group gathered at the steps. There's a man standing at the front, holding a glass bottle. Inside it, a brownish liquid. He lifts it above his head and shouts, "Water from St. Cadwin's skull, blessed healing, and only a half-pennier. It's relic season." In medieval times, saints' body parts were hot property. The toe of a martyr, a sliver of bone from an apostle, a droplet of dried blood locked in wax. These were sacred artifacts kept in reliquaries made of gold, silver, and glass. Or, if you were poor, sometimes just in jars, like this one. You inch closer as the crowd stares, with a mix of awe and skepticism. The relic seller explains that drinking water that's touched a saint's skull can cure ailments of the chest-mind and peculiarly bad dreams. That last one gets your attention, but you're still stuck on the fact that this man has a saint's skull, or part of it, or says he does. You've seen stranger. In one neighboring village, a church claimed to have 3 fingers from St. Jerome. Another monastery boasted the hair of John the Baptist. Several shrines claimed to possess the same tooth of St. Apollonia. Historians still argue how so many duplicates were accepted without question. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe belief was the point. Still, some relics were more intimate. There's a story about a church that displayed St. Clair's eyeballs, dried glazed like beads. Another kept a bottle of milk from the Virgin Mary. You don't ask how. You really don't want to know. But the creepiest saint's blood. In some towns, vials of it were kept behind altars, and every year priests would display it to see if it liquefied. If it did, it meant peace. If not, well, best start fasting. Back in your square, the relic seller opens a velvet pouch and reveals a toe bone. It's small, yellowed, and wrapped in silk. One woman kisses it. Another presses it to her forehead. You're handed a piece of cloth said to have touched a saint's shroud. You clutch it because why not faith and fear dance together in this place? And maybe that's why relics hold so much power. But there's a darker edge too. Some people collect relic dust scrapings from bones mixed into bread or swallowed with wine. You once heard a tale of a knight who wore a finger bone into battle for protection, only to die when it shattered on his breastplate. Bad omen, people said. Some relics are stolen, traded, even faked. In one infamous case, a merchant was caught selling the teeth of Saint Michael, which turned out to be donkey molars. Still, the belief remains. You return home with a flask of saint water, now slightly warm and cloudy. You sip it cautiously. Tastes like old wine and hope. Before bed, you tuck the scrap of cloth under your pillow and hang a small wooden cross on your door, just to be sure. You blow out the candle. You listen to the wind. And for once, you sleep peacefully. After all, there's a saint watching over you somewhere, probably. And now, the candle's nearly out. The storm has passed. The toe bones are tucked away in velvet again. The bells are silent, and the plague doctors have vanished into mist. You stretch beneath your blanket, the one that still smells faintly of herbs and old straw, and close your eyes. The past was strange. Wasn't it creepy? Yes. Unsettling often, but also weirdly comforting in its own way. A world ruled by rituals, charms, and beliefs so powerful that even a dancing chicken might need defending in court. You made it through with your skin mostly intact. You wore legal fabric, dodged lice, survived the mouse paste, and didn't get struck by lightning. That's something. So as you drift now, slowly, gently, imagine the crackle of a fire in a stone hearth. Picture candlelight flickering over carved wooden beams. Listen to the soft toll of a chapel bell in the far distance. Not a warning this time, but a lullaby. Let the images blur, let the cobbled streets and plague masks fade, and let your breath slow to match the rhythm of the night. Whatever world you wake in tomorrow, know that the past is behind you, and no one's going to make you drink skull water at breakfast. Unless you want to. Sweet dreams, time traveler.